But we want it to rise from hearts that understand that you first loved us. That in infinite time past, you've chosen to love us. And into infinite time in the future, you will show us the magnificent riches of your love toward us through Christ Jesus. And so we're right here in the middle of an infinite past, and you choosing us, calling us, and an infinite future of expressing your love to us. But you have proven it here in time in the cross. And you have given your life, Lord Jesus, to us, for us, to free us. So we rejoice in Jesus Christ, our King. And we give you praise. And Father, we bring our weary selves in here today, battered from the world and the flesh and the devil, and coming here today with the knowledge that you can refresh us in prayer and in song and in Scripture, Lord. And so we drink it in with the hope that we'll leave different. So I pray for your Holy Spirit to do that work of comfort, of confrontation, of conversion, that we may leave here able to say, oh, Jesus, we love you because you first loved us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So good to enjoy this time of worship together, and so good to have the opportunity to share the Lord's Word with you. You'll see on screen that tonight is our first official meeting for our water trip. We want the nations to know about the love of Jesus Christ. And one of the ways that we do is by meeting fundamental needs. And the water trip and bringing water to the Sachiula people is a great way for us to express the love of God through Jesus in a very tangible way, meeting the needs of those precious people who need water. So we're looking forward to that. Let's meet tonight, 6:45 p.m. in the fellowship hall. Even if you could only stay for 15 or 20 minutes, we can give you a good overview of the trip and help you get ready. If you've had any interest at all whatsoever in going on this, we welcome you, and we would love for you to be a part of what's going on in our ministry there. Guys, we're so thankful for your long-term commitment there. So, jumping into the Lord's Word, we're studying today the conversion of Saul. One of the single most influential events in human history is this moment we're studying, where Saul is converted and the gospel is going to come to what we call the West. It's going to go out from Jerusalem and come to Rome. Rome is going to be forever changed by the gospel, and then the word is going to go forth from Rome into the West. And it is likely that every one of us could in some way trace the path of our spiritual pilgrimage back to Paul, to the conversion of a man named Saul. We've heard both names. One is his Jewish name. One is his name that he would be called in Greek culture. So that's why you get these two names and the fact that they're used differently along the way. We've been talking about what we're about and what our job is, what is our mission. The mission of the church is to glorify God by seeking to bring all people to know Him. That's what we're going to see happens with Saul. He's going to become a missionary on mission, bringing the knowledge of God to all people. And to do so in a personal relationship of faith by the means He's given us. He's given us His creation, the Bible, the Holy Spirit, our consciences, the wonder of the church, and ultimately He shows Himself perfectly through Jesus Christ in order that we may be transformed to grow. That's discipleship. That's sanctification in His likeness, becoming like Him in such a way as to show others what he is like. That's the mission, is demonstrating by life and word what the message of the gospel is and what the God we represent is actually like. So let's jump right into our study today. Let's consider the religious and political atmosphere surrounding Saul's conversion. Now, this is very important because if we just jump into his conversion and we don't see all that's going on around it and all that he's going to give up and forsake, we'll miss the glory of this complete 180-degree turn in Paul's life. He doesn't go from one kind of morality to the other, from one kind of religion to the other. This man has a 180-degree turn in his life. Well, we need to see him as a persecutor. Paul believes that he is serving God. When we meet him in the New Testament, we meet him as a guy holding the coats for the people who are throwing rocks at Stephen. So we meet him in the end of Acts chapter 7 as Stephen preaches and as Paul encourages and his people kill Stephen. Paul is right there on the scene, seeing the whole thing. And then we meet him again in chapter 8, verse 1, where he is ravaging, that's the word used, to the church. He's heartily agreeing with killing Christians, and he's happy to help that happen. So he's going literally neighborhood, house to house, working through the communities to find anyone who names the name of Christ, to drag men and women into prison, and ultimately to bring them to their deaths. And so this is the life he has. It's what he feels like is his calling. He thinks it's his mission, and he believes heartily that he is serving God while he's doing it. He's so confused about who God is and what he is like that he believes that this ministry, which is actually working against the mission of God, is the mission that God has sent him on. So we have to see him as persecutor. We meet him again in chapter 9, verse 1. Now Saul was still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. He went to the high priest and requested letters from him to the synagogues in Damascus. He's going international now. He's not just satisfied to eliminate Christianity in his own hometown and his own country. He's moving out of his country into other regions where Jewish people have been dispersed, and he's going to go to those synagogues, and he's going to, by the authority of the temple, which has governmental okay, he can go find somebody in another country. He can arrest them, and he can drag them back and have them prosecuted, imprisoned, and brought to a death sentence. And so this is what he's doing. It's how he lives. He's given his life, and he takes it so seriously that he doesn't mind traveling great distances to carry it out. So he's on that mission when we meet him at his conversion. He's on his way to bring people into prison and death. We also need to see Saul being promoted. I want to say promoted. When he introduces himself in the book of Galatians, talking about his history, not that the Galatians had not met him before, but that he's introducing a part of his history that is important in explaining himself. He's saying in Galatians chapter 1, verse 15, he says, verse 14, I advanced in Judaism among many contemporaries. In other words, he's moving up the ladder. In terms of a career path, Paul was on the accelerated career path. He was moving upward, gaining rank, notoriety, power, influence, probably funding. All of this is on an upward climb, and Paul is to be envied in his day. If you were in his circle, he would be the guy that everybody would say, I'd like to be like him. He'd be the guy that the leaders at the top would point to and say, y'all need to be like this guy. And so he was being promoted, so much so that he now was an international emissary of the temple with the legal authority to step into a land not his own and arrest people and drag them off to prison. And so he's moving up. He has power, influence, prominence. And so Paul, when he describes himself, says, man, I was on my way to the top. Well, we need to see him also under pressure. Under pressure. What would that be like? Well, during the time that is going on in the life of the Jewish community, there's some pressure. If you'll go back to John chapter 11, verse 48, you've got this discussion going on between the leaders of the temple, the Pharisees, and some local political folks. And they're having this discussion. Jesus is healing people. Big crowds are coming out to follow him. And he's considered a spurious teacher. In other words, not belonging to the sect of the Pharisees, not belonging to the sect of the Sadducees, not belonging to the Herodians, the ones who had kind of bought into the Roman culture and held on to the Jewish heritage. He wasn't from the inside group that kind of kept the peace with Rome. He was an outsider, Jesus was. So his movement was considered a threat to the emperor. In fact, when Jesus is falsely accused later, they will accuse him of calling himself a king, which would be a direct threat to the Roman emperor. And so the Pharisees are gathering together in John chapter 11, and they're saying, listen what's going to happen. If we let this breakaway group grow, Rome is going to come down on us, and they're going to say, if you guys can't keep the peace, we will oust you from the center of influence and will bring in substitutes that can hold the people at bay and keep these uprisings down. So the pressure that Paul is under is great because as an emissary of the Pharisees, as an emissary of the temple, as a representative of this group, they've got to squash the uprising that now thousands of people are a part of. That's word's getting out and it's getting up to Rome. So the pressure is on to hush up this movement so that Rome does not come in, remove the Pharisees, remove the Sadducees, remove the ruling elders, install their own people to keep the peace. And so in the quote that I have there in John 11:48, it says, if we let him go on, now he's speaking here of Jesus in John 11, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. They're basically saying we're not going to have our political influence anymore. We're not going to have our political jobs. We're not going to have our religious influence, our religious jobs. And so therefore, our standing is questionable. And so Paul is sent out as an emissary to try to quell the rebellion. And the way they're trying to quell the rebellion is through death. This is not a small thing. You have the authorities of Jerusalem putting warrants out for the arrest of all Christians that will lead to their death. And so when we meet Saul again in chapter 9, he says he's breathing murderous threats. In other words, what's coming out of him is very powerful because he can back up his talk with the authority of the government in Jerusalem and bring death to the people that he's seeking. And so he's being promoted, but he's under pressure. He's got to perform. He's got to get this job done. Saul, if you're going to be our representative, you're going to have to produce results. You're going to have to get those people out of those towns back here, and we got to shut this Christianity thing up. So Paul is on his way, says he's breathing threats of murder. What's that mean? That's how serious he is about this job. Now imagine you believing in a job so powerfully that you would go international as a killer. I mean, that's the stuff we watch in spy movies. We're reading these secret CIA agents whose job is to go over to some other country. And we're watching some drama, some NCIS thing, and we're all going, oh, isn't it weird if something like this was true? Here's Paul doing it. He is so sold on his job being the right way to persecute in the name of God, the right way to be promoted into the place he wants to arrive, and under the pressure to bring it about, so much so that, do you know what he's talking about on his way? Killing people. That's the murderous threats that he's breathing. I don't know if you've ever been passionate about something, but imagine this level of passion, where murder would be okay in your conversation as how you believed you were called to serve God. So that's what's going on here. So we have to see the atmosphere that this is all working in. Number 2, here we go. There are at least 3 essential elements in the conversion of Saul. What happens to him that we would say, okay, is normative to conversion? Because his conversion is not what we would call normal. We don't have the normal preaching of the gospel. We don't have the normal thing that we see in other events, like when Peter's preaching and people fall into the conviction of the Holy Spirit. We don't have that normal kind of thing. So what are some elements here that are normative to anyone who comes to Christ? So let's break that down. First, exposure to the light. It's interesting, the way that they present Jesus here is a bright, shining light. It's sort of a hint or it's the reflection on a hint that came earlier when Jesus was transfigured. And 3 of his disciples saw him, and it said that he became like lightning. He was that bright. He was so bright that he was just blindingly bright. And so Paul meets Jesus, and Jesus gives Paul the exposure to the light. Suddenly, the glory of the Lord himself is right there, and Saul sees it, and it's so brilliant that he is blinded by it. Read it with me in verse 3. As he traveled, this is 9:3, and was nearing Damascus, a light from heaven. So this is the glory of Christ in heaven coming down, revealing himself, exposing Saul to the light. It says, and a light from heaven suddenly flashed around him, falling to the ground. So it's such an impact on him. It's so bright. It's so devastating. Tim Keller calls it a collision. And so he's hit by this light, and it's so powerful that this man who moments before was breathing murderous threats of powerful control over other people, he's on the ground from this jolt. Wow. Falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So the very first thing that happens is that Saul is exposed to the light. The light of the glory of God in the face of Christ. Paul calls it later in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. The light of the truth. The light of who Paul really is and who God really is. You see, Paul had a different idea about what God was like than what God really is like. And he was so twisted in his idea of what God was like that he felt like murder, international murder, was actually on God's agenda for his servants. And so he's carrying it out. And so suddenly there's this moment. John describes it from Jesus in John chapter 3 when we hear Jesus say, and the judgment is this, that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. So in this moment, the righteousness the holiness, the glory and purity of who God is revealed in the person of Jesus Christ shines into the whole being of Saul so powerfully that it's blinding, so powerfully that it puts him on his face on the ground, so powerful that he has to say, "Who is it, Lord? Who is it?" And so you have Saul's exposure to the light. For any of us to be saved, something like this has to occur, where suddenly the light of the gospel, the light of the truth, the light of God's Word, the light brought by the Holy Spirit convicting us, this has to happen to us. It may not be on a road so bright that it blinds us and puts us on our face, but it happens so gloriously in our heart that we finally, for the first time, see truth, see holiness, see righteousness. Remember the work of the Holy Spirit promised in John, where it says that the Holy Spirit is going to come and He's going to convict men of sin, righteousness, and the judgment to come. The righteous conviction is suddenly that the glory of the holiness of God comes to bear on our sinful heart, and we see for the first time. We see. And so though Paul is blind for the first time, he sees. So there's the exposure to the light. Second, there's evaluation in the light. Now that the light has shone upon him, he sees himself in light of the glory of Christ. Remember in John chapter 3 where it says, men hated the light because their deeds were evil, and they would not come to the light lest their deeds be exposed. Suddenly, Saul is exposed. And he now has to evaluate himself in light of Jesus. You see, when we evaluate ourselves in light of each other, it's one kind of darkness justifying itself in the presence of other kinds of darkness and saying, my darkness is better than your darkness. That's what happens when we start evaluating ourselves in light of the darkness of other humans. And we sometimes feel good that our grayscale of darkness doesn't seem on the surface to be at the same level of darkness as the grayscale of someone else's. But now suddenly the light of Christ is now on him and he is exposed to that light, and now he has to evaluate himself. How do we know this happened? We know it from Philippians. I want to take you there. I'm going to keep you just a couple extra minutes right now, but I need to give you this and then I'll move you quickly toward an end. Philippians 3, Paul tells the evaluation. In light of Christ, he's now exposed to the glory of who God really is, the pure, holy light of righteousness. Paul's now going to see his sinfulness. This is why Paul later is going to call himself the chief of sinners, because he has seen himself so clearly in the light of who Christ is. And so in Philippians chapter 3, come down to what he's processing in chapter 3, verse 4. He says, although I have reasons for confidence in the flesh, if anyone else thinks he has confidence in the flesh. In other words, if you want to compare darkness, I'll compare darkness with you. I think my darkness isn't as dark as your darkness. That's what he's saying. He's saying if you want to do the human darkness to darkness comparison, my shade of gray is not as dark as your shade of gray. So he begins saying, this is how I used to view myself. He says, if anyone else thinks he has grounds for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised the 8th day, that's keeping the law, even as a child, his parents kept it for him. Of the nation of Israel, that's his heritage as a people group, as ethnicity, as nationality. of the tribe of Benjamin, okay? First king, tribe of Benjamin. Where did Saul get his name? First king. A Hebrew, born of Hebrews. I was the height of this ethnic identity that we have regarding the law. A Pharisee, strictest, most conservative, politically, morally, regarding the zeal, persecuting the church, regarding the righteousness that is in the law, blameless. In other words, you couldn't get a moral thing against me that you could publish in the paper. I was clean. I was squeaky clean in all of these things. So the light comes to him, and he has to start evaluating. Because suddenly what seemed like good to him before, that he was relying on for his salvation, he was relying on his birth, he was relying on his nationality, he was relying on his morality, he was relying on his religious strictness, his conservatism, he was relying on all of those things and saying, you know, my shade of darkness is just not as dark as yours. But suddenly, the light of Jesus shines down from above, and it's time for personal evaluation. And he runs through the list. He has 3 days to evaluate. When you read here, 3 days he neither eats nor drinks nor can he see. But for the first time, though he can't see outside, he can see inside. And this is the evaluation process. Now, after having been exposed to the light of who Jesus is, he now is evaluating his life not in light of other Hebrews, not in light of Gentiles, not in light of Pharisees, not in light of Sadducees, temple workers, unbelievers. He's suddenly evaluating his life in light of Christ. And listen to what he says. It's astonishing. Verse 7, but everything that was gained to me, I have considered loss. In light of Jesus, he had to evaluate himself and say, everything I thought my identity was tied to is useless. All my boasting, all my religion, all my nationality, all of those things, in light of Jesus, is just some different shade of darkness. And he says, but everything that was gained to me, I have considered to be lost. Now, this is interesting because he's using accounting terms. Now, if you're an accountant, you know the difference between credit and debit. You also know the difference between assets and liabilities. Paul thought all these things that he listed were assets to get him into heaven, and he turns around and finds out they were liabilities keeping him out of heaven. This is really important. And he's stunned. He's not eating, he's not drinking, he's praying, he's trying to navigate this. He's been exposed. And then he goes on and says, more than that, I also consider everything to be a loss in view of the surpassing value of knowing Jesus Christ my Lord. What's he saying here? He had to come to a place where he had to say, do I want the stuff that is here and now that I've been holding on to that has made me who I am, or will I leave it and become who he is? Now listen, every one of us have to come through this. Every one of us, to be truly saved, have to be exposed to the light. And we have to evaluate who we are in the light. That's why there's so many people in church who are not saved. Why? Because instead of being exposed to the light, they've been exposing themselves to their favorite people that they watch on the television that they don't like and comparing themselves. Democrats to Republicans and saying, oh, I'm not like them. Republicans to Democrats. Thank God I'm not like that. And all of a sudden we pump ourselves up to make something of ourselves just like Paul. And listen, those thinkings are the things that will keep you out of heaven, not get you in. There is but one way, and it is to abandon every way but Jesus. That's it. And this is what is rattling Paul's world. Because everything he valued nationally, personally, identity, career, every security, every hope, everything in him is shattered. And he says, I got a choice to make. I can have who I was, or I can have who He is. There's no middle ground here. I believe the church has failed to clarify there's no middle ground. And Paul makes it clear. And what does he do with it? Well, after the exposure and the evaluation, you hear him say it. And this is what he's after. More than that, this is 3:8. This is Philippians 3:8. More than that, I also consider everything, that means everything, to be lost in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. Because of Him I have suffered the loss of all things and consider them as, and I love the CSB, dung. Because that's the word. He says, everything I was is a pile of dung. Everything I had my hope in was a pile of dung. Everything I had my identity in was a pile of dung. Because there's something so much higher than all those things that everything appears to be dung in light of Him. And He is Christ. And so he goes on and he lays it out and he says, that I may be found in Him, not having a righteousness of my own from the law, but that which is through faith in Jesus Christ, the righteousness from God based on faith. My goal is to know Him and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of His suffering, being conformed to His death, assuming that I will somehow reach the resurrection from among the dead. And so what does Paul do? He embraces Jesus. That's what's happening. He's finally got it. He's been exposed to the light of who God really is in Christ. He's evaluated who He is really in light of Christ. And he's saying, I got to lay hold of something here. I'm either going to stay holding on to all that I've held dear all of my life, or I'm going to let it all go and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to lay hold of the only one who's worthy of my life being poured out for them. His name is Jesus. I'm going to stop there. I can preach on till 3 o'clock today. You want to enjoy that? I would. But 3 of you would say, yeah, I'll stay. But let's just stop for a minute and let's breathe this in. Jesus is not calling us to serve 2 masters. He's not calling us to serve one thing and Him. He's calling us to an exclusive claim on who we are. You see, Paul laid hold of what was given to us in the heart of the book of Hebrews. And that is, we worship Him, we embrace Him, we love Him. And Jeff, can we sing today? Can our closing hymn be, Jesus, we love you? We've got even more reason than before to sing Jesus, we love you, because we've seen this glory here. We behold Him and worship Him for who He is, for what He's done for us, and for where He's taking us. This is what Paul was saying. He's saying what we're going to get as a result of this embracing is so much better than anything you thought you would have ever gotten. It's so much better that everything you've ever thought of on this earth is going to just be like dung. And Jesus is so much higher. And so come to Him. And so what happens in the book of Acts is after these 3 days, where he's been exposed to the light and he's evaluating his life in light of the light, he embraces Jesus and he comes out swinging. And the first thing that he says is this. He says to all the people who he previously was allied with, he said these words, Jesus is the Son of God. That's what he told them. He came out swinging because he was sold out in his heart. Would you bow with me? My brothers and sisters, if salvation is going to come to any one of us, it's going to come when we are exposed to the light. The light of the gospel, the light of the glory of Christ in the gospel, that we have all sinned, and that it's not a comparative of darkness things here on this earth, but a comparison to the one glorious light. And we have sinned, and He is righteous, and a judgment is coming. And we have hope because Jesus has died for our sins, and He is beckoning us just like He beckoned Paul. And today, if the light shines in your heart, maybe you'll say for the first time, "Who art thou, Lord?" And He will say, "I'm Jesus who you're avoiding. I'm Jesus who you're running from. I'm Jesus who you're hating on. I'm Jesus who you're criticizing or pretending to be like." Would you let that light shine on you today? My brothers and sisters, let me share one more thing with you. If revival comes, it'll come the same way. If we want revival, we're all going to have to get on our knees and cry out, "Lord, shine the light on the church and every heart in the church, and show us that we're just not really quite what we ought to be. And let us embrace you afresh and anew, Jesus. Expose us to who you are. Help us evaluate in light of it. And drive us to embrace you." Some of you, you need to call on Jesus today to save you. The light is shown. Call on Him today. You can pray right where you are. "Lord Jesus, I believe this. You died for my sins. You're raised from the dead. I'm in. Save me." You can call on Him today, and then you can do just like Paul. You can go get baptized and get busy telling people about Him. Would you stand as God leads you? Would you come?